As you can see here, a little bit of a shocker in the NBA as the Philadelphia 76ers target for us here on the PHLY Sixers podcast. That is Kyle Neubeck. I'm Devon Givens. Derek Bodner off with this one, but we had to get into it for an emergency pod right away as the Chicago Bulls and the Oklahoma City Thunder get together to do a deal. And why are we talking about it? Because one of the names that we bring up very often, and so do you as Sixers fans, Alex Caruso headed to Oklahoma City in exchange for Josh Giddey. That is according to Adrian Wojnarowski. And as you put it there, Kyle, is our thumbnail text there. Shocker. Shocker.
I mean, it just, if you couldn't tell as a person scrolling through Twitter, in the time that I've spent texting people, calling a few people over the last 30 minutes, it was just a giant, what? Really? No picks? No nothing? It's just Josh Giddey? I've reported on the show before. We've talked about it a lot on the show over the last 4 or 5 months that the Sixers were heavily in for Caruso prior to the deadline. The Golden State Warriors were heavily in on Caruso prior to the deadline. I could never pin down exactly what the outgoing value was from either the Sixers or the Warriors, but things I had heard were multiple picks, perhaps multiple first-round picks were there to be had if the Bulls had wanted to trade Caruso. And yet somehow we end up here today where, look, I get Josh Giddey was a high draft pick previously. The Bulls are probably sitting there saying, hey, we're buying low on a guy whose stock has fallen over the last however many months. But looking at him in the playoffs, he basically became unplayable. He was moved out of the starting lineup. His shooting issues have gotten worse and worse and worse because, more attention has been paid to the fact that if you leave him out there, he'll step out of shots and he doesn't shoot a particularly high percentage when he takes the shots that are there. And to give up a guy in Caruso, who it feels like most of the league is interested in, just a stunning trade. And I say it all the time. I think the Bulls are one of the worst run organizations in the league. Picture perfect example of exactly why I say that. To give up a guy who you go to the team that has more draft picks than God, and to not get
find any.
Like, look, you want to say you value Giddey more than some of these future picks from other teams they could have dealt with. Fine, I get it. Like you want somebody that's a known quantity. To not get any draft picks is wild. Absolutely wild.
Yeah, and so the first thing I thought of was, wow, what a poorly run organization, as you just said, this is, because we talked about it so many times where even at the start of this offseason, Kyle, we saw reports of, they're still going to try to run it back. They're going to try to extend DeMar DeRozan, give him some money, maybe look to do some other things because they are, quote, in win now mode as a 38-win basketball team that's constantly playing for a play-in situation somewhere in that 8 through 10 range. And this is what you decide to do, one of your better players, one of your most important players, and you get one guy for him that you have no idea where he is right now in terms of his game space, just because of, as you just mentioned, the last time we saw him, he was coming off the bench because of Isaiah Joe in their starting lineup for the OKC Thunder. So this was unbelievable that they pulled this one off. Kudos again to Sam Presti for this one. Looking at a little bit more of what Woj had to say was, to your point of what they're doing with Josh Giddey, he basically said with the unknown, they've been trying to figure out something to replace Lonzo Ball and find a point guard. So they bring in Josh Giddey, who fell out of favor because he was on the floor with too many other playmakers. Well, excuse me, didn't we just see this guy? I think he was in the top 3 for the most improved players in Kobe White because of what he did with that point guard position. It wasn't his fault that they didn't make the postseason. Zach LaVine was not healthy and a ton of other things that went wrong with their situation. And they were able to pull this one off. So that's just unbelievable. But with all of that, as we talked about it, you saying the Sixers had interest, other teams had interest around the league. How does this now impact the 76ers in any idea of how they go about their offseason if Caruso was, in fact, whether it was partnered with the Levine trade or by himself? How does this now shift the focus a little bit for you?
Well, look, I'll say something that I said to our listeners when the OG Anunoby trade was made prior to the deadline this year. What you've seen over the last, let's call it 6-7 months, is that while having flexibility and while having first-round picks to move is valuable, and in the right circumstance, you can use that to say, hey, we're going to offer you the moon and the stars for whatever player it is, whether it was Caruso, whether it's for your cousin, Devon, if they get in the mix for Mikal Bridges, like there will be some circumstances where maybe having a lot of picks to trade helps. But what you're seeing with the Bulls here and what you saw in Toronto, there are a lot of circumstances where it's not enough to just have picks. That a lot of teams, rather than trying to go down super down the road, hey, we'll take a 2028, a 2030 pick for this guy who's productive now, they would rather have those known quantities. The Raptors prioritized, we want Emmanuel quickly, and we want RJ Barrett in exchange for OG Anunoby. In this instance, you're trading for Josh Giddey, who, while he's a damaged asset right now, he's somebody that his skill set is kind of defined, and the Bulls believe we can get XYZ out of him in the immediate term. And so while the Sixers' flexibility, it seems like it's appealing in terms of, hey, they can bring in any free agent theoretically that they want, you have to find suitors in these trades that actually prioritize the picks over the known quantities. Now, will that come up? Will that happen in the next week, the next 2 weeks, next 3 weeks, whatever it is? It's certainly possible. I think we'll probably get into the ongoing Paul George rumors and the Brandon Ingram stuff and all that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is an example of, like, flexibility is good. It certainly isn't everything.
Yeah. How come they weren't really involved in this one, 76ers? At least as this one goes down, we see a lot of people in the chat. How could they not get into? Well, the one piece that we've always talked about, Kyle, is this. They don't have any young players to give up. Now, in this case, it's not a young player. It's an all-NBA defensive first-team player in Alex Caruso that has a lot of value. Comes in now to OKC because they have a decent young player in Josh Giddey. But the Sixers, what would they have had to give up? And we've talked about it plenty, which is they would have to give up some picks here. And the question is, as we'll talk about this a lot more in detail, and we'll certainly get Derek's thoughts on this too, how many picks do you think this would have been equivalent of if they would have had the opportunity to do so in acquiring Alex Caruso?
I mean, I don't think you can make an equivalence, right? Because they showed in talks with the Sixers and talks with the Warriors. I don't know who else they potentially were involved with, but multiple picks was not enough. Like they were not operating as a rational team. Like there's just the only way you can wrap your head around it is that at the ownership level, and I've said this many times, the Bulls just refuse to ever be like, are they going to blow it up? And if they are, why aren't you prioritizing getting picks and trying to like truly strip this thing down instead of getting this guy? Like, even if you're an optimist on Giddey, right? Like he has some skills that in the right situation that maybe they could take better advantage of them, right? Playing next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, who took the on-ball reps. That's not the best situation for him. He needs the ball in his hands, and maybe you put some shooting with him or more shooting with. But the Thunder were a 5-out team, so like there's just no rational way to evaluate this trade to me if you're trying to say like, well, what would it have taken?
I had to ask it because
and I get
it just doesn't make sense, right?
I'm trying to figure it out, but so I would say this, and I mean this in a nice way. This is not a dig at people who propose fake trades. There's a sentiment amongst media members who, like, fans love to do fake trades, right? And propose, hey, here's a trade machine screenshot, whatever it is. And there are a lot of times where I frankly look at some of these things and I'm like, man, that's a fucking stupid proposal. Like, no offense, but like that would never happen. And then the Bulls make this trade.
This
and
was
it's like,
one of them.
I
right?
can't criticize any of these fans for these like fairy tale scenarios because real NBA executives are making trades like this. So I would say one of the lessons I would take for it is, and it's something I do stress in certain ways, is like, it never hurts to ask, right? Like, I might think a proposal is stupid, like, oh, why would this team do that? But you might find someone dumb enough to make the trade. So, yeah, I like being serious for a moment as it applies to the Sixers. It is a known target, a guy that would bring value, a guy who fits a need off the board. And so you have to look elsewhere. If you do want to look at the Bulls, I know that Patrick Williams, I believe, is a restricted free agent. So it's a slightly different scenario. I wonder if, he is pretty available now. Like, is he a guy that maybe the Sixers go after? Now, that would come with complications. If it's a sign and trade type situation, then that hard caps you at the first apron. So there are issues there. We've heard from Casey Johnson out in Chicago that they are actively entertaining Zach LaVine discussions. We will get into those in more depth later. But the Sixers have, pushed back on LaVine interest in the past. If the Bulls are making crazy trades like this, and maybe you could say, hey, we'll take a bunch of draft capital for LaVine. Maybe you can exploit the Bulls in that way. Like, I just don't know what comes next for Chicago. And it certainly seems like we are headed for a wild next couple of weeks or so.
The funny part is, folks, just to take you behind the scenes a little bit, before our show earlier today, we did talk about, and it was our GM, Vince, who said, man, I'm surprised things have been so quiet since the championship has been done. The finals is completed. Boston won. And you guys, both you and Derek, like, yeah, it has been kind of quiet outside of the Pascal Siakam piece where it looks like they're going to be in agreement on an extension for a 4-year deal to stay in Indiana. And then boom, as soon as we're done our show, where we had a pretty fun show with our first round mock draft, this drops. And of course, it impacts the 76ers and what could potentially happen with them. Wild stuff. The NBA, man, you got to love it.
Yeah, so I'll just note for our people who are here and watching this video, obviously we've seen the Paul George news. That's another piece of this. That is one because it is Sixers specific, and because I need to talk to all the various people, we'll call them the stakeholders involved in all this. That's going to take some time to unpack. I would say my initial instinct, if I were a betting man, not as intel, but as a betting man, this signals to me that the Sixers received some type of news that suggests maybe the Paul George thing isn't happening, or maybe it's gotten less likely for whatever reason. If it's that Orlando and Paul George have had nobody tampers in the NBA, so clearly no conversations were had, or maybe there's something out there.
Not at all.
Maybe the Clippers are finally at the negotiating table. I'm not quite sure yet. I wanted to make sure that we noted that while we're here, because a lot of people are interested in it. I'm doing a lot of tea leaf reading, Devon. So we're going to come back tomorrow. I'm certainly going to talk to some people, but yeah, I'm just trying to pick my brain up off the floor. I don't know what your kind of thoughts on this whole thing are, but just a wild trade.
Yeah, wild trade. First thing I thought of was, that's all. Just seeing Josh Giddey, because when you see the initial thing and sometimes you'll see a follow-up. You've done this as well. When you got more information, you got the guts and the meat of it, and then you needed a little bit more to throw out there as you break some news. I was waiting for plus this amount of first round picks also for the Chicago Bulls. And that didn't happen. And it was especially because of the trade partner in OKC Thunder that has so many assets that you would think that the Chicago Bulls did ask for it, but maybe they didn't. And maybe they did not. Maybe they did. And Sam Presti said no. And look at what we're giving you right now. And here's why, because of what we're doing here. And so that's where I was, just more of really, that's it. That's all it took. And and good get for OKC. The fact that they can team him up with Lou Dort as a defender, you can see what they have in Chet Holmgren at the center position as a rim protector. Maybe this also leads them into the direction where they go add another big man out there. But I have to think that the guys, as far as that team goes, are pretty happy. They have ball handlers in Caruso. He can be a second or third ball handler because the ball is going to be in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's hand, Jalen Williams' hand as well. That Alex Caruso is a pleasant addition to that organization for what they do. And adding to all the perimeter players that are out there in the West, this just certainly helps with the defense that they'll have out there on the perimeter. But absolutely takes away a pretty good player off the board with Alex Caruso not being there for the Sixers to inquire about for this offseason.
Now, here's what I would say. If we want to offer one piece of hope before we go, I know Devon is on a time crunch this evening. Thank you for our people for showing up. If you're trying to spin it into any kind of optimist case for the Sixers, are the Thunder open for business on any of these guys in the rotation? They have a lot of rotation players, right? I've not heard anything specifically on a guy like Lou Dort. Certainly Cason Wallace had a good rookie season. It's not to suggest that they're actively being shopped, but as Caruso comes in and is presumably going to play a pretty large role, Dort, who's on a sizable, not bad contract, but a sizable contract, does Dort potentially get moved, or do they entertain any discussions there? Now, do you want to deal with Sam Presti, given that he just put the fucking ski mask on and stole this guy? Like, clearly has
didn't have to put a ski mask on. he just walked right in.
This is like
this is happening.
The robbery in Heat, where they just walk in with duffel bags and
yes,
things only go haywire afterwards, right? So, yeah, I mean, do you want to deal with Sam Presti? Are you able to find any kind of appealing package there? But I mean, that would be my natural follow-up, right? They're loading up, but by getting a guy who Caruso is going to play major minutes, is one of your younger guys potentially expendable? Can the Sixers get in there and say, hey, look, Caruso's off the board. That's somebody we would have traded these at least one, maybe multiple picks for. Maybe we beat down their door. Maybe you see what happens there. So I would certainly be calling Sam Presti, seeing what they're doing. I'd be calling everyone for that matter, but that's kind of where my head is at right now.
Our good friend Martian Lynch, 33, of course, in all caps as usual. Isaiah Joe for the 16th pick. Derek will love that one. Bring him back home, as Martian Lynch says, Isaiah Joe for the 16th pick. And MDB, our other good friend, says we have to send a fruit basket to our CHGO brethren because they have to be going crazy for what just went down. So
shout out to Peck and Gottlieb and the rest of the man, Big Dave.
This is another reason why you folks, and spread the word, you have to be out there with us for our live draft show next Wednesday, presented by Coors Light and Rothman, because even if the Sixers pick, they may not, because you never know what may happen, who might become available, who the Sixers may shift their attention to. If the Paul George news makes you feel like they're kind of out on Paul George, that they have to go in another direction, and that might mean a trade possibly, you have to hang out with us at the Garage Fishtown location to be there for us for the live draft show next Wednesday, 8 p.m., as we get ready for the first round of the NBA draft. No Alex Caruso, Sixer folks. So we have to maybe talk about a few more things tomorrow at 2:30 on the PHLY Sixers podcast. For Kyle Neubeck, Brianna stepping in. Thank you, Bree, for being available to produce this emergency pod. I'm Devon Givens. We thank everybody for hanging out with us for this emergency pod. We'll be back tomorrow on our usual time slot, 2:30 on Friday, PHLY Sixers podcast. You never know what happens. Be ready. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hit that thumbs up.
We all silly like the mayor.